I'll just have to.
Kia ora, everybody, and welcome to our lunchtime session. We're just as we're waiting for everyone else to join, I can see my screen lighting up with all these people joining us at this time. So hope you've got your lunch in a nice cuppa before we hear from Sue. So we'll just wait another minute or so. I wish my bank account would tick over this fast with all the people joining. This is cool. So just as we're waiting for the last people to join, just some news from us. So anyway, I'm Say. I've just stepped into daughter's position while she's off on maternity leave. Some of you may not have heard, she's actually had baby. She actually had a baby boy. I think it was around the 29th of October. So we've been growing our own succession planning as part of our network. So we've got a brand new baby warrior that's going to be joining our team. So it's just a matter of getting the right size hivers and a place in Parliament really quickly. All right, well, we might get started. Before we do, I might just open us up with a karakia, and then we'll move into a session and just acknowledge and welcome everybody here. So our karakia for today, I'll lead us in it. This is ngā mihi o te rā ki te whānau e huihui nei. Kia tauterangi Māori e, kia whakatapua tātou me ngā mea, e whakapono ana tātou, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. And welcome again. Yeah, it's my privilege today to introduce Sue Coutts, who's probably the second person I ever met in the Zero Waste Network, like 20 million years ago, after the late Warren Snow. And so it's wonderful to be able to work alongside her, but also get to listen to what she shares and learn. Welcome to all our networks that are here today. And as you know, the series that we've got for the pre-Hui is all around some really topics that we might look at, what sort of collaborative opportunities there might be. And this just helps to prepare us for some of that thinking as we come together at the Hui in a couple of weeks' time. So Sue's going to talk to us about the CRS. She's going to give us a bit of an update of where we're at, and also looking at where to from here. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Sue Coutts. Kia ora, Sue, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Say. Yeah, I'm just going to get my screen organized so I can share it, and then we'll be off. Yeah, how's that looking for everyone? Can you see what's there?
Yes, that's good.
Yeah,
Perfect.
hoping there's not too much background noise in my office today. Yeah, so thanks for the intro, Say. I think one of the great things, like looking at all your faces today, is you just remember how many wonderful people we work with. I've been very lucky in the last week or so to actually see people face to face and actually be in the same room working together on a project. And I'm just remembering how cool it is to do things together. And the reason why we enjoy this work is often because through following our hearts and doing the things we care about, we find people that we really want to be connected to as well. And that's really the purpose of these sessions that we've got going on this week, as I understand it, that we're looking at potential projects that we could work collaboratively across the 3 networks on. So I'm here today to share one that we've been doing some work on over the last 25 years. Very fitting that Warren Snow is one of the people that Say mentioned, because I remember Warren coming to me after he'd already been working on this stuff for years, way back in the beginning of the century, talking about, we should have this container return scheme thing. And like everybody, I thought, yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. Why don't we do that this year and get it happening? And then 20 years later, we're still thinking, why don't we do that this year and get this thing happening? So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on where we've got to so far with our 25 years of labour in this kind of work. And then I'm also going to wee bit of detail about what is CRS for anyone who hasn't really had anything much to do with it so far. And I'll also then hopefully I'll only be 10 minutes, and then we'll maybe have some time to discuss what our options are for next steps and whether or not people are interested in working together on the next stage. So I wanted to start with this slide because it's really the story of why Zero Waste Network exists. It's about our network is about people who are doing similar things and care about similar things, like on the Zero Waste kaupapa, sharing what we know and do for the benefit of other people in their communities. So it's not all about us. We want to be able to work together. We want to be able to share what we're learning. We want to be able to make sure that every community has access to the sorts of services and things that we believe are really valuable and shifting us towards zero waste lifestyles and zero waste business models. So working together is a really great strategy for achieving things that we couldn't do independently. So, as one tiny organization down, I used to run Wastebusters down south, and as one tiny organization, there was lots of stuff that we couldn't achieve on our own. And we looked to the network and joining the network and being part of this network as a way to be able to achieve things that we couldn't do by ourselves. So we've talked about CRS a lot over the years, and we keep coming back around to the point that it's a good thing to promote and advocate for, and that it's really useful to take a collective approach to make the best use of our kind of ability to come up with the arguments, put forward the case, and to get a bit of like the force of the masses behind the argument, because it's still something which is flip-flopping over the line between being accepted as something that government wants to progress. So over the last 20 years in Zero Waste Network, we've used different types of models for trying to progress projects like this. And at the moment, we've got a commercial arm. We've spent the last few years developing a commercial arm called Localized, which some of you may have heard, and you can see, say, he's got his Localized T-shirt on today. So we have a lot of boundary, across, a bit of merging on the boundaries there between Zero Waste Network and Localized. But the idea behind that is that we really need a machine that can do deals on behalf of the members, and to be able to, have a mechanism for progressing some of these opportunities. And when container, having Localized there is really good piece of the puzzle for making sure that when CRS does go over the line, that we've got a good chance of being involved in the practical implementation and sort of the business side of it. Now I'm just going to click onwards. Okay, so for those of you that haven't really heard about container return system, or have really got not much knowledge about it, I'll just do a quick. I thought it would just be handy to say what actually it is. So in the simplest sense, when it's basically the idea that when you buy, people or businesses buy drinks in single-use containers, they pay a deposit, and it's around the world, it's somewhere around 10, 20, 30 cents is a common amount that you might put in as your deposit when you purchase your drink. And when the container's empty, you take that container back and you get your deposit back. So it's really an incentive for you to do the right thing. It creates high return rates because everyone wants to get their deposits back, so they actually do save their containers and bring them back. And it's also an incentive to pick up litter. So if any containers do end up in the street or the gutter or the beach, then you end up with often kids or people with a low income, maybe travellers, will go around, pick them all up and reclaim the deposits. A lot of people who are as old as I am will have memories from the 1970s of doing the same thing, where we used to collect up bottles that were reusable, and they were reusable. You could take them back to the dairy, and you could get your, it used to be 4 cents and 8 cents, 4 cents for a little one, 8 cents for a big one, and you could trade them in, and they would go off to be washed and refilled. So from the kind of consumer, the household perspective or the consumer perspective, that's what CRS looks like. And then when you go in behind it, it sort of looks a lot more, a little bit more, nerve-wracking, because it's really about the flows of materials and the flows of money that are required to make the system work. And there's two we talked a bit about the deposits, but the other part of the puzzle, which is really interesting to us, is what we call the handling fee. And so at the moment, recycling is generally funded by ratepayers, or it's funded by, in commercial situation, you might pay a commercial charge to a collector to come and pick up your recycling at the back door of your business. But what we're proposing is that it's more of a user pays approach, where when you buy a drink, there's included in the purchase price, there will be a handling fee. That means that the real cost of dealing with that container will be covered throughout its whole life. And so I'm not going to talk too much about how it all flows through the system, but I think that those are the two main pieces of the puzzle. There's you'll see right in the middle that there's a managing agency. And so you have a managing agency which is created to run this system, and they might do things like make sure that the practical, the practical points work, that there's a system or a mechanism for all those bottles flowing through the transport and the drop-off points that it needs to. And they'll also do the admin, so they manage all the money and make sure the money goes into the right hands. And they'll collect the money from the beverage producer, make sure it goes into the right hands. And then they also have responsibility for achieving the targets. And they're generally things like getting a certain percentage of the bottles back, so a large percentage of the bottles back, and making sure that a large proportion of the population or the people in the country have access to a drop-off. So that's kind of how, simple terms, how a CRS might work. For the Zero Waste Network, we're always having these quite complicated stories about how we really want to advocate for, we obviously want to advocate for CRS because it supports zero waste principles. It's a way of getting really high return rates, making sure that every single-use bottle does get returned back. We harvest everything that's going out there. And it also is a mechanism for transitioning to reuse, away from single use and into reuse models. So it means that now once we have this infrastructure for harvesting bottles back, then we can use that for harvesting reusable bottles and shift away from single use disposable, which is not the best option for the environment. We're arguing on behalf of New Zealand Inc. So even if there was no benefit to the members, we would still be arguing for container return scheme, because it's a really great way of shifting the cost off the ratepayers and the people who are, it's being, at the moment, single-use containers are being subsidised heavily by ratepayer and taxpayer money. It would be way better if they paid for themselves as they went through the system. And we also are obviously advocating for it because we believe that there'll be a lot of benefit for the members being involved in the system. And it helps us to set up the infrastructure that we want to set up in our communities to run zero waste hubs, or, community recycle centres or take back sites. And it enables us to attract people to those sites who could come and learn more about what it means to be zero waste. So we've got those three layers that we're always arguing on. So it's a little bit of a complicated storytelling project. But basically, the story is that the container return scheme is going to help us to fund the transition to a circular economy. If every single container has the cost of proper recycling built into it, then that means that we, as a country, we can afford to do a really great job of recycling those containers. It's really high, very popular. 80-90% of people are in support of it. When you do a survey in New Zealand, it has been that way for a long time, and it still is. It works, it's really successful. You get high return rate, you get really good quality material coming back through the system, and it does mean that there's a lot less litter, and we can see the evidence for that all around the world. As I said, pays for itself and sets us up with infrastructure. So we've got a lot of really good reasons why we're advocating for this this way of doing a better job with our container recycling. So as I said, it's been a long story for us. Like, we've been working on this for so many years, and we've got lots of friends and relations like the Kiwi Bottle Drive guys who've been working alongside us, the Green Party as well, long-term advocates for CRS, and we've recently seen Labor starting to come a bit closer to being on board. And we basically, we've been through several stages. We've been through the stage where we're like, should we have a container return scheme? And we were really hopeful last November that we'd made it over the line with that. When the Labor government decided that they would progress it, they said, yep, good idea, we're going to do this container return scheme. And the very sad news that we had in February was that container return scheme idea had been thrown on the bonfire, and the policy bonfire, and Chris Hipkins and Jacinda swapped over roles. And It's hard to tell whether it was really just bad luck that we had a lobbyist for the, the glass industry came into Chris Hipkins' office at that time, and he advised, it's possible that he advised them to just, pull the pin because he's fundamentally opposed to that type of, to container return scheme, or it may just be that government got cold feet around the idea of cost of living, and they felt worried that if they were going to put the scheme in place, that they would be open to attack by the industry around, increasing the cost of living for people at a time when that's very topical as a discussion in New Zealand. So, we had hoped that we were actually into number 2 good and solid. We'd actually decided we were going to have a CRS, but it feels like we still have some work to do to argue that case now, especially with the new government, National Act and New Zealand First. There's a different argument to be made than the one that we made to Labour, so a bit of work to do there. There's been quite a lot of work done over the last 3 years on what's the best model or structure for a thing like this. There's a lot of complicated legislation and kind of guidance that needs to be tucked in behind it to make sure that it works really well. And so we're still really stuck in number 2. What's it going to look like? You can see basically the industry lobbyists, they do their best to try to stop these CRS schemes coming in whichever country they're being promoted at the time. And that's been true in New Zealand. We've seen a lot of industry lobbying hard against putting a CRS in place. And what we've seen just in the last few weeks, so their strategy usually is delay it as long as we can, try to find ways we can stop it getting put ahead. And I saw just the last couple of weeks that Coca-Cola's coming out and saying, this container return scheme thing could be okay. And if it went ahead, then we should go with the Queensland model, which is basically one of the weakest versions of a container return scheme that we could see coming in. So the second thing that usually happens with the lobbyist guys is that they'll start to go, okay, we're going to have one, but we want to make sure that we're in control of it, and it's the weakest form that we can have. And so that's kind of the next battle that we have to have. Yes, that's about all I've got. That's kind of like, where are we at? We're sort of still in the battling phase to get it up. We were highly hoping that by now we would be in the phase 3, get it established, and that Labour government would have actually committed and started to push it over the line, but we still haven't made it there. What we've been advocating for in the there's one thing, we want a container return scheme, and the second thing is what might that look like, and what sort of scheme would be best for our members? What would the best scheme look like as far as we're concerned for our members in our communities? And so the one that we've been arguing for, the model we've been arguing for, is a 50-50 split, so that there would be some return to retail. So you could go and you could pop your container into a reverse vending machine when you go to the supermarket or some equivalent type place. And then we've also been arguing that there should be container return depots and drop-off points at zero waste hubs or community recycle centres or those kinds of places where there's lots of aligned activities, and that could be a really good way for people to bring their containers back as well. So we're arguing that there shouldn't be totally return to retail, that there should be the opportunity to bring it back to your transfer station or your local recycle centre or maybe your environment hub as an alternative. And these could be, they could be large, where there's millions of containers coming into them and it's a big warehouse facility, or they could be quite small in a rural area where you could have, maybe 500,000 containers coming through a small town site run by a men's shed or an equivalent kind of a facility. So return to retail is actually, it gets good wins in the short term. Most people go to the supermarket regularly, but basically it just reinforces the same old linear story that we've already got. It keeps us stuck on recycling. You buy a sugary drink in a single-use container, you take the empty container back, you get your deposit, and you go inside and you buy another sugary drink. It's basically you get stuck in that loop. Whereas what we would argue is when you bring your bottles back to a zero waste hub or an environment centre, then you get really good wins in the long term, because people get exposed to a new way of thinking about resources and recycling and reuse, and they get exposed to a whole new world of strategies for shifting to a zero waste lifestyle. And it's also really convenient for people because they can come with their bottles, their electronic waste, their other things they might want to do at the same place, and they can do their reuse shopping, access to behavior change services, and all of that in the same place. So it can be like a one-stop take-back shop, which is something that we've been trying to advocate for. This one's just a little bit more of a technical one for the people that are sort of interested in the relationship with the action and investment plan, and we've got this story in New Zealand, or that the Ministry for the Environment has been building up over time, that they want to create a nationwide network of resource recovery sites. And what we've been trying to do is to connect their thinking around the container return network with this network of resource recovery sites, so they can see that if we did them both together, that would be a very effective way of spending money and using money, and it would give us the opportunity to leverage both to achieve good outcomes. And so we know that in New Zealand we've got limited capex and opex available, that we really want to transition existing assets and infrastructure like transfer stations into much more like the model of a zero waste hub or a recycling centre. And we believe that these container return sites, drop-off points, would be a great addition to that. So there's three big drivers for that. The two that interest us the most is the foot traffic, bringing lots of new people to our sites, and also the revenue stream for the recycling. Anybody who's involved in recycling at the moment will know that it's pretty hard to make $1 out of it unless you're a very big council contract or you're working at scale. So for us, those are the two things that we're really keen to see progressed. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's kind of where we're at. We're at the point where the new government's going to come in. We're facing, a whole new wave of lobbying and kind of campaigning to try to convince them that they should push container return scheme over the line. And I guess that what I'm really interested in is people's thoughts about whether or not that's something that we all want to put a bit of energy into over the next 3 years. Zero Waste Network will be, but maybe people from the other networks might also have some thoughts about that. And there's two pieces to the puzzle. So we want to get a container return scheme across the line in New Zealand. So that's going to take advocacy. So that's, advocating for the cause, advocating for New Zealand Inc., and advocating for the membership benefits. We are looking to run a campaign which would show, just really prove the point that there's great public support. One of the interesting things to me is that we have, a few large businesses who don't actually have very many votes when you think about the voters. And we have, thousands and thousands and thousands of New Zealanders who do have a lot of votes who are for the scheme. So I really think that there's some wins for us if we could get a good show of support for CRS, that we could maybe have better success with pushing it over the line. And then traditionally we've worked with a lot of partners, and we're looking to do that again to try to run a big campaign that a lot of people are involved with and be able to push it over the line. And then the other side of it is Localised is working away in the background to think about how we can set the network up to be a player, looking at relationships with some of the bigger people that might come into the system, like I've forgotten their name now. Sorry, just blank moment. Tomra is one, but there's people who are involved in these types of schemes in other countries, and some just coming into New Zealand now, looking at how they can get involved. And then we really need to do a bit of work on the research and the modelling that sits behind it, our argument and our case for why we want to be involved. And so those are some of the activities that we've got in our minds to progress. So keen to hear what people think, and I'll just make a few notes of people's points as we go along, and just really interested to hear what people think about what would be different organizations might be willing to put into in terms of energy or effort to be able to, if we can supply some sort of central messaging or run a campaign, are people keen to be part of it and to use their social media networks and their sites to be able to progress some of that stuff. But also interested in hearing what other assets or interests or whatever people have to bring to the table. So that's about it for me in this part. And then, yeah, maybe if Say and Izzy can look out for who's got a question or who wants to chat. Yeah,
That's
just
great.
really, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue. That was excellent. It's good to be refreshed about that as well. So looks like we've got a few questions. We've got one from Liana here, which is a pretty cool question. It's like, if it is so popular, who's against this and why? You answered it a little bit, but you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, what we're noticing is that the people who are against it and why is generally the large producers of beverages. You know, people who are who are making packaging, and people who are making and selling packaging, and people who are bottling their drinks. And the reason that they're anti it is that basically the story is one of externalities. At the moment, they don't have to cover the real cost of their business model, which involves, you know, pumping a whole lot of single-use containers into the world and then going, oh, someone else's problem now, not my worry. There's, say, for example, with litter, they're happy to do a token gesture on litter, you know, oh yeah, we support Keep New Zealand Beautiful and we're really trying to do our best on litter, but at the same time, their business model is actually essentially spraying, you know, litter or plastic litter out into the world. And I think that, you know, that pattern that we've seen around the world, even where, you know, you're required to, a company is required to be part of a container return scheme in one country, like Australia. All the states now have container return scheme. Exactly the same companies are selling all the bottled drinks over there as they are over here, but they're just, you know, they resist it to the very last moment. And a lot of it is around the lack of willingness to be regulated, or there to be rules imposed, or, you know, controls around their business. It's almost a philosophical argument. And there's another part, which is just that it will cost them. They'll make less profit out of selling the same drinks. There is some people who say there's a drop in the number of drinks that get sold, but usually it's just a short-term blip when the new prices first kick in. And what we've seen in New Zealand is that there's a large number of the small producers who are really keen to see CRS come in. And so there's a lot of, you know, smaller drinks people who are like, this would be great if I could tap into this for my business to be able to get reusables up and running, have a mechanism for harvesting them. They can see the benefits and the, you know, like the benefits to their brand. But there's a lot of pressure still on from the big global corporates, and especially the glass industry is the main one that pushes back. You can see that in UK and Britain at the moment. There's the glass industry is the main lobby group against getting good container return schemes in over there. We see the same thing in New Zealand with the Glass Packaging Forum.
Cool.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, thank you. That I think was pretty clear why these big guys don't like the scheme. I'm probably going to claim being a new kid on the block in this next question from Gareth, which said, would Zero Waste Network be interested in managing the agency, the managing agency?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting question. There's a couple of layers to the managing agency. There's sort of like the high level governance type looking after admin job. And then there's what they often call a network operator, which means that there's some of the Australian states have a network operator where you have someone who looks after all the drop-off points and the mechanics of how it all works. And so we're interested in playing a role in the network operation side, but I think that the job is, you know, the job of being the network operator is probably a bit out of our scale in terms of the amount of capital we would need to raise to be able to get into that game. But we're really keen to be a partner in that. So we've had some discussions with a few people in the, you know, in the process to try to, you know, find a way into that. Yeah, so it'd be looking to bring a network of sites into the conversation or the negotiation around how does the network operations get established.
Cool. Got a really good question from Louise, and I know we spoke a little bit about this with doing an environmental scan around the new government being formed, and that's you know, what is the appetite for the CRS with the incoming government, and I guess what might be our approach, what sort of messaging is needed there?
Well, I think that there's, I would say that there's mixed messages coming from the three parties. You know, we have some people in National say it's a no-brainer and we should just go ahead. It makes a lot of sense. It's a way of getting away from the corporate welfare sort of approach that we've got now, where the ratepayers are really subsidising all the single-use packaging. There's that sort of argument amid sort of more conservative people in there. And then there's probably also the classic, sort of line that they have, which is, in principle, it makes sense, but we wouldn't want to do it like that. And so I think there's some people who would maybe see a container return scheme come in, but they would make it into something like a weak version of the system where they give all the control to industry to run it, manage it, and the outcomes are generally much weaker when we see that model implemented. So I think there's a risk around that. New Zealand First has sort of flip-flopped around on it. Some of the New Zealand people and New Zealand First people in the past have really been strong supporters of CRS, but generally it's a very personal thing. Like, they don't think they have really the sort of the integrity of the policy platform because they've been coming and going a lot. So I think that maybe New Zealand First are good people. They're generally quite populist, and so there's a good argument to be made that they'll be swayed towards popular opinion. And with ACT, I guess the user pays story is attractive to them, but they haven't really got the hang of that in relation to recycling and waste yet. They're still looking at, they haven't been able to expand their thinking into the idea that user pays for recycling really makes a lot of sense. So that would be, a lot of work to do with them as well.
Great, thank you. You mentioned before about the Queensland model being a bit of a weaker model. Could you there's a question about there, but just to explain why it's sort of a weak model and what's an example of a strong model?
Okay, so what we would say is that industry being in charge is fox in charge of the hen house. So industry are the people who have the most to gain by, they're going to pay for every container that comes through. That's included in the cost of putting their product onto the market. And at the moment, they generally making a good profit out of selling single-use beverages, but a little bit of that will be eaten away if they had to actually cover the real cost of recycling. And so they have there's a great benefit to them. Like if they get someone told, like, this may or may not be a true fact, but it's an impression that I've gained from somebody else telling me about this, that for every 10 percentage points, it's $50 million that they stand to lose or gain. So say they have a recovery rate of 60% versus 70%, then it could be as much as $50 million difference in the price tag for them to run that system. So there's big bucks involved in this, and it's better, if they can run a scheme which they can, like, recycling traditionally has been a way to secure social license. Recycling, we only actually recover less than 50% of the materials in New Zealand at the moment, but the companies can say, oh yeah, my thing is recyclable. And so if you have a container return scheme up and running, people can say, yes, we support this wonderful scheme, and isn't it amazing? Oh, it only recovers 45% of the materials, but that's not our fault, it's the consumer's fault because they're, not bringing them in or whatever. And so there's the industry have a big interest in the scheme only harvesting a small proportion of the materials. So often the schemes that industry run might get like 50, 60% return rate, and the schemes that are run by government or by some sort of an independent operator might be up in the 80, 90% range, because they have an interest in recovering the most containers. They're not trying to, protect their bottom line. And so there's one dimension, which is how much control does industry have over the system and the process. There's another dimension, which is how strong are the targets, and how much is the idea of public access built into the system. So you really want to, for a scheme to be really effective, it has to be available to people right out in the WOPs as well as people downtown city. You've got to have really good access to be able to get your return rates up, and for it to be a good scheme for everyone. So generally the schemes like the Queensland one, there won't be many places you can take your bottles and cans back to. You might have to travel a long way to do it. The investment in the infrastructure might be just enough to get by, but it won't be really a lot, and it won't be the maximum. It'll be the bare minimum to scrape across the line, is what I would say.
Very cool, thank you. There was a question here by Ian around just how strong public support is, and Louise has put, thank you Louise, for a Consumer New Zealand survey, just saying that there was 78% respondents were in favour, and so she's put a link in there, so It's consistent with what you were saying before about that 80%, 80,
Yeah.
90%. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen numbers from, kind of high 70s up into the 80s, and there have been some surveys which have been done by different people that they've chosen not to publish because the level of support was too high. They didn't want to attract attention to that. So, there's, obviously I can't say where I've seen them or why, but, it's like, there's generally 80 to 90% support for schemes like this from the general public. And one of the things that the companies say is, they say yes, but they don't really know what it means. And I have seen evidence, which also is not in the public domain, that people do really understand that it involves paying up front, getting your deposit back, and that there is a recycling fee built in. So it's public support that comes with a real understanding of what the system might involve from their perspective. It's not just, yeah, that sounds lovely. Yeah.
Thank you. And another question, just how could a small environment hub, for example, join a campaign? And would there be templates or resources for this?
Yeah, so what we're thinking at the moment is that container return scheme has been one of our things we really pushed through the last term of government, but a lot of it was focused on the public submissions and all of that type of thing. So what we did through the public submissions process was we created a template that people could sign on the dotted line and just agree. We created a submission guide for people to be able to put their information out there for the kinds of campaigns that we'd be looking at over the next year or so. It's probably key messages, tiles for socials, kind of copies of press release and stuff like that, the sort of key points you might talk to your local politicians about, that sort of thing. And one thing that I haven't really talked to too many people about this is, the idea of some sort of a public show of strength. So maybe band together several different big organizations who can push through some kind of a petition, which we could try to get large number of people sign up to in a short time to be able to go, look, we really need to get this over the line. People do want it, but totally open to thoughts that people might have about that.
Great. Thank you,
Yeah,
Sue.
so it's probably, I guess what we're looking for people to do is to broadcast and share the messages that we can provide, and that, maybe one of the useful things we can do as Zero Waste Network is to generate the kind of the content, and simplify some of the argument to make the resources available so that it's easy for people on the front lines to be able to incorporate that in their daily work through their socials or their, press releases locally or talking to politicians, etc.
Thanks, Sue. That's been really good. I'm one of those people that remembers the 70s. My 1 litre glass bottle of lead used to get me 17 cents to help buy my dad's feed my dad's other habits. But those were the good old days. I don't think we've got any more questions sort of in there. There's a couple of big statements in there, which is quite good. Here's a quick one for you, Sue. Can you please speak to the state of CRS design process? Where did that get to and what happened to it now publicly? I think you touched on that.
Yeah. So as I understand it, the design process, like the beginning of last, I think I'm pretty sure it was, I've lost track of the years a bit, but at the beginning of last year, I think there was a submissions process. It was part of the Transforming Recycling consultation, where the government put out its ideas about what the design would look like, and people, there's, I think, something like 1,600 sort of substantive submissions went in, and about 4,000, just, positive supporting, submissions, and that were quite general. That information was then crunched into a set of cabinet papers that went to cabinet at the end of last year, and that was the basis for cabinet deciding they would progress CRS and go ahead with it. And there has been a cabinet paper which is kind of like the legal structures that would need to be put in place, or the changes to the law that would need to be put in place to be able to progress it. So there's been a lot of work done in the background. There were some other pieces of work on, how might reuse systems integrate with CRS, which were dropped, and they were work that was about to start, but it was dropped when the decision was made not to progress CRS. And so there is a lot of work sitting there. Some of it is kind of well aligned with what we would want to see, and some of it is kind of, a bit less so. But, the MFE has made a lot of progress on that. So, but whether or not, I guess my concern is that if we have a National Act New Zealand First government that progresses legislation for waste or legislation for the CRS and product stewardship, then it may be a lot different to what we would hope for. It might not necessarily be aligned with the trajectory that we would want to see things going on. So yeah, that's all to be, we don't know who the minister's going to be yet. We're not really sure what some of the policy trade-offs have been. We're not sure who's I won't say crazy ideas, we're not too sure whose crazy ideas would have made it onto the list, and, to what extent we'll have, a steady hand at the wheel. So one of the good things I think is that, sort of feel bad championing conservatism, but a lot of the work that's come out of the Ministry for the Environment has been fundamentally conservative around the new legislation. It's based on the sorts of principles that we saw in the last Nationals waste policy, national John Key government waste policy kind of direction. And so I feel as though the work that has been done is not radical in any way. It's very conservative. If we get a small C conservative government, kind of like, just want to keep progressing, ticking things over, which I think maybe, someone like Christopher Luxon is more likely to advocate for, then we're in better shape than we are if we have ACT and New Zealand First kind of, in control of the waste tiller. That will become obvious once we've got our, we know who the minister is and all that. I think Simon Court would be quite a different minister to, say, a National Party minister.
Thanks, Sue. Look, I think I just want to acknowledge a couple more questions. There was a question there about has any of the CRS info been translated into Māori? I think I know the answer to that.
At the moment, not, but I think it would be, if we're going to do some resources to be really used well this year, then I think it would be worth us exploring that. We have really, a lot of opportunities to do a good job of that through our relationship with Parakore and others. And I think that if there's demand for that, then I think it's really worth us putting some time and energy into that.
Cool, thank you. And there was a note there from Maury down in Palmerston North, and great to see that some of the network has gone through and given some feedback there from Ellie and also Louise around having that space and who does what and etc. So that's been really good. Thank you. Thanks for everyone for sharing also links on the chat. I think that's been really good. And just before we let you carry on and enjoy the rest of what's left of your lunch, just wanted to thank Sue for today. Thank you for that. It was really insightful. It was good to hear how this really works for us and what it means and how we can get by and support something like this. It'll take a whole village to make this change, or a whole nation to make this change. Just also wanted to remind you that tomorrow's session is pretty cool. It really aligns to this issue because it is around driving policy. And so our cousins there in Environment Hubs Aotearoa will be hosting that. And just a reminder, it's at 10 o'clock tomorrow, not at lunchtime. So bring your scones, not your big lunch. So come in and enjoy that. But yeah, so no, thank you very much to everybody, and thank you, Sue. I'm going to close us in karakia just to finish our day, but look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. I just want a big shout out to Bill Heaps. I see you're in the chat. Oh, you're in the call. I know you were unwell. You presented yesterday, and you're back on board today. Real trooper. So just a mihi to you, and hope you feel better soon. All right, I'll close us in our karakia, which I've just lost on my phone. How's that? Okay. Okay, here we go. Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, kia tinana, te wairua, i te ara takata. Koia rā e rongo, whakairea, ake ki runga, kia tina, haumi e, hui e, tai kie. Kia ora whānau, see you tomorrow.
Sweet.